What's up guys, my name is Jake. Ever since I was, 10 or 11, I came across, and this is a true story, I came across the story, or at that time, the very real, in-development project of Freedom Ship. I remember I became obsessed with this out-of-the-world concept, and got so excited for the future. But it's been well over a decade since, and nothing solid has culminated. So today I figured it might be interesting to look into what happened to the ambitious Freedom Ship concept, what it was, and what the future may hold. I also got a chance to see what the current CEO behind the project has to say. This is the story of Freedom Ship. I want to quickly thank Ridge for sponsoring this video. Go to ridge.com/BSF or use the code BSF at checkout to get 10% off your order. Now let's go back to the 1990s with a visionary man by the name of Norman Nixon, an engineer from Sarasota, Florida. He was developing a small island in the Turks and Caicos. However, after losing the property, he switched gears to an entirely different concept, a floating city. Back in Florida, Roger Gooch, an entrepreneur and investor, had a pretty successful travel agency business which he had been operating for a few years. He had also been dreaming of something new in the leisure market and came up with the idea of buying a cruise ship and refitting the existing cabins into condo units. The return on investment had the potential to be lucrative, and Roger, along with his colleagues, had begun looking seriously into the idea. However, one day, just by chance, things were about to change.
Come back, and I'm reading the paper here in Florida. A man had a small article, and he goes, "Condo cruise ship seminar." It was just a small little article. And if I hadn't come back at that time and read it, I would have never encountered Norm or any of them. So I go to this seminar. It's at a hotel, and I enter, and there's a pretty large room, and there's about 4 people in the room. And at the time, I didn't realize who he was, but Norm Nixon comes over and introduces himself to me. And he says, "I'm the engineer of this development, this thing, and we're glad you came, you know." And I said, "This can't be 5,000 feet long." He goes, "Oh, yeah, it is. Yeah, it'll be the largest vessel ever built in the world in history." He was an interesting guy. He was very learned, needless to say, and in a lot of respects, he was somewhat eccentric. And he says, "I'd really like to speak with you further about this. We can build it, but we don't know how to bring it to the attention of the world." He says, we need someone to do this."
Norm Nixon and Roger hit it off at the seminar, and soon Roger was brought on to their team as head of marketing, tasked with bringing this insane idea to the public. At this point, Norm and his team had only shown a few select investors and curious patrons what they had, but now things were about to explode for them. By the early 2000s, the Freedom Ship project began to pick up some steam, with various nautical magazines writing small stories. But then, Roger made a deal with the Discovery Channel in 2002 with a nationally broadcast documentary of Freedom Ship. Suddenly, the project was catapulted into the public eye, and the team was suddenly inundated with media requests and even people looking to buy units aboard. Freedom Ship almost overnight became known across the world, which is great news for the team working on getting it built. Floating cities or even islands is nothing really new. It's been depicted across science fiction even as early as the late 1800s. However, what made Freedom Ship different and somewhat intriguing is how literal and practical from an engineering standpoint it was being taken. Sure, someone can dream up a rough idea of something, but these guys were putting together actual logistics. The idea behind Freedom Ship was to comfortably house over 50,000 permanent residents and take in an additional 30,000 tourists each day. Though because it's technically a ship, it can transport its residents all across the world into new ports and subsequently take on new tourists, an always changing market of guests and scenery. It's sort of like taking, say, all of Baytown, Texas, and putting it on a movable platform. Actually, that's kind of insane, isn't it? Anyways, to make the return on investment favorable to the cost to build, the ship would need to grow in scale to an unprecedented level. Freedom Ship would span almost 6,000 feet, meaning the vessel would be over a mile long. For comparison, one of the longest and largest ships today is the Maersk Line EEE class ships, spanning around 1,300 feet. The largest cruise ship is Royal Caribbean Symphony of the Seas at 1,180 feet. So it's almost like lining up Symphony of the Seas 6 times. Freedom would also span over 25 decks, and one of its most striking features is the rooftop airport deck. Fitted with 2 runways, Freedom Ship would allow turboprop aircraft to land and depart off of its own top deck. Below, the ship would also feature various inlets in the superstructure design, allowing for tons of open space concourses fitted with pools, parks, walking space, restaurants, you name it. Even in some iterations, a theme park. Towards the aft of the vessel, the hull would split into sections, allowing small bays where tender boats could tie in and dock, to ferry residents and guests on board. Of course, to support all these people, the vast square footage inside would accommodate everything a small city would, with schools, a hospital, a mall, and really anything else you can think of. Timeshares would cost around $70,000, and resident condos would start around $250,000 all the way up to several millions of dollars. Though since the ship is constantly moving, your condo view is always changing. Plus, since Freedom Ship is not under the federal laws of any certain country, residents on board would theoretically not be taxed by any government. At the end of the day, Freedom Ship would be so large that it would have to be built offshore at the staggering cost of over $10 billion. At that price, external funding, and a lot of it, would obviously need to be raised before things began to move forward. Not only did the team need to finalize the plans themselves for the vessel, but they needed to figure out the enormous task of logistics to even build the ship. So, over the next few years, Norm, Roger, and the team had begun working on raising the capital to start construction. However, individuals and companies dealing in fraudulent and scammed money became all too common for them, and really slowed things down. They reached out to brands and offered large equity stakes to investment firms, but the general consensus was that Freedom Ship was still unproven despite the proposed healthy return on investment, and they were just going to wait and see.
And in that respect, we were going to a lot of global maritime symposiums and conventions, and we naturally met a fair amount of the execs of major cruise lines. I was certainly amenable. I said we would happily joint venture with a notable, credible cruise company. We did have communications through these conventions and et cetera with various people of Carnival Cruise Lines, Norwegian, Royal Caribbean, and some other notable cruise companies. And they were all like, what an interesting project. We're going to wait and see. But it was very appealing, and a couple of them said, God, I hope you guys pull this off.
Even with the interest of prominent and wealthy individuals in the Middle East, funding was held back until construction began, which would take at least $1.5 billion to begin, which of course brought them back to square one. By around 2008, the economy had turned in America, and Norm Nixon had seemed to have lost hope in his project. Him and Roger began to communicate less, as Nixon had seemed to focus on raising funding himself. As years went by, the concept failed to gain investor funding, and in 2012, Norman Nixon had passed away, seemingly bringing along the dream of Freedom Ship with him. That was until just shortly after, when Roger had stepped back in and decided to revitalize the project once again with him at the helm, now to try and complete what the team, and more importantly, his colleague and friend, had started. Immediately, he began talks with an Indian-based entity who had capital and government contacts that wanted to build the ship there. While that continued through the mid-2010s, Roger established contact with a development company based in Hong Kong called Global Development, who had been following the project for many years. They became a major stockholder in Roger's newly formed entity, and they began looking for additional players to raise money for the concept. But that brings us to right now, and really, well, it's been over 25 years since the project has been going, and really nothing has culminated.
Well, we do get a lot of, people certainly said, oh, I've heard about this, it'll never happen, or it hasn't happened before, or whatever. And a big hit was, to the positive sense, was hit when we affiliated with Global out of China. Certainly from a construction and logistical standpoint, you can go into the superlatives of it's the biggest, it's the most, it's the largest, it's impossible, but the engineers actually said this. They said, basically, we can build this given the money. Now, the question is whether with the money was it practical from an economic standpoint. And after Norm had determined, as you saw in Discovery, that you're basically building it in a modular standpoint with off-the-shelf steel samples, the cost got effective to the point that people could afford to buy the unit. Relative to our relationship now with Global Development in Hong Kong, I feel very confident, most confident, and keep in mind I am biased, I've been involved in the project for almost 2 decades, I feel now, whereas before I would say, in the old days, I would say there's a 50-50 chance of this thing becoming reality. Now I can be frank, and I'm a pretty much of a numbers guy. I'd have to put it at 82% chance this thing's going to go. If the demand wasn't there, I'd probably give up on the project. I just hope that it gets done within my lifetime.
Yeah.
And I would say you could probably be seeing some significant progress shown via the media within 6 months.
Roger hopes to have substantial capital into the company by 2020 and substantial progress in the years following. Is that actually going to happen? Well, personally, even after talking to Roger, who's a genuinely nice man and just wants to complete the multi-decade dream, and he certainly believes in the concept himself, I just have a hard time believing that something of this scale requiring that much capital is even possible with the talent and corporate infrastructure that they have. By all means, that could definitely change in the future, but I'm just not sure. My opinion is basically worthless since I have no formal education in economics and engineering, but the amount of things that need to coalesce from funding, regulations, logistic building plans, and so much more is just overwhelming. Just the amount of staff needed to execute something this large, which has never been done before, remind you, just seems so out of reach. Though the core idea of what Roger had in the beginning with a Kondo cruise ship did come to fruition in the form of the MS The World, a purpose-built Kondo cruise ship launched in 2001. It went with the same idea of having a permanent residence on board a ship traveling to new ports every day. Though this vessel is vastly different in the sense that it targets the ultra-premium market, mainly with wealthy retirees, and apparently it's been very successful. Freedom Ship really was a phenomenon. Maybe some of you read about it in Popular Mechanics back in 1998, or maybe you saw it on the Discovery Channel like I did as a kid, or maybe you just saw some futuristic pictures of the vessel somewhere deep and dark on the internet, and never really thought anything of it or what the story behind it was. For me, I have always been excited about futuristic projects, and something this ambitious obviously caught my eye. Freedom Ship was the idea of a man who dreamt big, and by chance had caught the attention of Roger, possibly another person crazy enough to try and see this potentially revolutionary idea through. Honestly, I don't think it will ever happen, at least in the form it is now, but Roger has a level of optimism and assurance that I just have to appreciate what he is trying to do. And I suppose every big idea in history has its doubters, and regardless, I certainly support him. So who knows, maybe this legendary, futuristic, floating city might actually take to the seas after all. I want to thank Ridge for sponsoring this video. If you have a huge wallet taking up unnecessary space, then Ridge is the perfect and simplistic solution. Ridge is a minimal wallet designed to easily carry all of your cards plus cash. It comes with a lifetime warranty along with a ton of attractive styles like titanium, carbon fiber, and my favorite, aluminum white, which I've been using for the past few weeks. Actually, a few of my friends use a Ridge wallet for the simplicity, and they seem to really like it, including myself. You can get 10% off your order today, plus free worldwide shipping by going to ridge.com/BSF and by using the code BSF. That's ridge.com/BSF. A huge thanks to Roger Gooch for taking the time to chat with me about his project and the history of it. If Freedom Ship is ever built, you bet I'll be one of the first on board. Anyway guys, follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Snapchat, and thank you very much for watching.